Hello, my lovely gaming folks. We are live here at GaryCon 2023 in beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. I'm Amanda Hammond. I am a senior designer with Wizards of the Coast in the D&D studio, working on 5th edition, and I'm here with a wonderful group of guests to talk all about adventure design today and tabletop games of all formats. So before we get into some interesting things they have to say, some interesting things you have to say, and questions from chat, I'm going to let them introduce themselves, starting with the gentleman here on my right.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Hello, everybody. I'm T. Alexander Stangroom. I'm the COO of Cobble Press. I'm also a writer and game designer. You will have seen some of my recent work in Tales from the Golden Vault by Wizards of the Coast.
Awesome.
And to this lovely person on my left here.
Hi, I'm Kelsey Dion. I'm the founder of the Arcane Library, and I'm just finishing up a Kickstarter for Shadow Dark RPG, which is a big, thank you.
Exciting.
It was a big Kickstarter launch that I didn't expect to get as big as it did. Yeah.
Are you now super overwhelmed with all of the wonderful support you've been receiving?
Yes. It's all good overwhelmed, yes. Yeah. It's been exciting.
And I myself, those of you who may or may not recognize me from various bits and bobs throughout the industry in the past decade or so, I have worked, of course, for Wizards of the Coast, but I'm also a former editorial director at Cobble Press. And before that, I worked at Paizo on a number of different games, including as the co-creator of Starfinder RPG, a little bit on Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and a lot of it on Pathfinder 1st Edition. And I believe that folks probably primarily know me as an adventure writer. And for these lovely folks as well, they are also very well known as adventure writers. So we have hopefully a lot of interesting things to talk about. If not, Alexander's just going to sing for us for 45 minutes.
I'm cool with that. That's fine.
So how about we start off by talking a little bit about what you think makes a good adventure. What are some of the bones that you try to lay down when you are first looking at putting something together for players to have a good time? Let's start with Kelsey.
Yeah, I think I always start to look at it from a foundational perspective. It's kind of about giving the players a problem to solve that only a hero could solve. That's, to me, really important in my adventure design. So I try to give them something pretty exciting and bombastic to work with, even at first level, and build out an adventure about a serious problem. That's for me. That's the foundational part.
Yeah, that sounds great. What about you, Alexander?
I think for me, I suppose it depends on what I'm writing for. So one of the things I write a lot of con adventures, and they're going to be playing very different to a standard module. They're going to be designed to be run in 3.5 or so hours, and success isn't actually the necessary objective of what's going on. You are going for fun, so you're looking for these massive set pieces and give the party the opportunity to succeed, but also to fail spectacularly, because that's where the fun is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That kind of leads me into my next question for you guys. So there's a difference, of course, between con adventures and for written adventures, but it all boils down to the players having fun and creating characters and experiences that will be memorable to them. What are some things that you think that players really enjoy when you're creating adventure design? What are some fun things that you try to do to keep that pacing alive, whether it's for writing or for something that is at a convention? What do you think, Kelsey?
Yeah, I kind of have this little trick that I use often when I'm designing that I kind of call like a cadence to what I'm doing. So part of the point of it is that you're trying to rotate between a variety of different encounter types and sort of actively do that. And when you're creating something that has possible branching paths, you have to really keep in mind is, am I going to be able to arrange this in a way that creates that cadence of maybe like combat, interaction, a back and forth, so things kind of feel like they have rhythm. Yeah.
Yeah, rhythm is a really interesting thing, and I think that's something that Alexander and I think about a lot when we're writing adventures. We've co-authored a number of adventures that have both been written and at cons as well. And so there's sort of a back and forth between making sure that there's active on-screen time for the player characters and they get to do things, but that it's not just a constant drumbeat of drama and stress and anxiety. What are some things that you like to put into adventures for downtime when that play is happening at the table?
One of the things that I think adventures struggle with a little bit is actually presenting information to the characters. It's all well and good having this fantastic meta arc that covers the entire adventure, but unless there's an easy way for the party to actually find that information, they feel some sort of like siloed, a little bit isolated, and what they're doing is great, but it seems divorced from the actual objective. So getting that information in adventure that is easily accessible. I mean, you can make a journal that they find or whatever, but getting that NPC interaction and letting the players role play and actually pull the information of the adventure out themselves. So what you're doing is an info dump, but you're letting them feel like they've achieved that, they've succeeded in doing that. It's not just handed to them.
That's a really good point. It's sort of that difference between the Star Wars scrolling on the screen versus a scene in which there's an important character who is having a conversation and happens to incidentally be giving information. That kind of takes the stress off you as the DM to be presenting that in that info dump. Kelsey, when you're looking to convey information, what are some of your favorite strategies for making the characters feel engaged and involved in role-playing?
Yeah, I think one of the things I focus on most, and I really make the center of any encounter, is that I try to build up a lot of interactivity. So that's a way for you to present a little bit of information that pulls the players in, and it gets them poking and prodding and trying to seek out more. And then you can give a bit more as they engage with those elements, so you're not just info dumping, and that they get the sensation of having uncovered it themselves.
Yeah, do you have a favorite example of a character that you've put in there as a plot important character, but that the players have maybe really latched onto?
Oh, absolutely. Like, I think for some reason this often happens where if the players come upon a character that is maybe like a captive in some way and is a sympathetic but needs help kind of character, it's kind of like the Meepo effect, I think.
Yes.
Really a huge, like, makes such a memorable character out of that. And they get to help that character when they could have maybe chosen not to, and that makes it feel more impactful for some reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we've got a good example of a character who is that plot important NPC who's there to make the information being presented humanized, and that's probably Dr. Donnell, who's in the Murkmire Malevolence, one of the adventures in the New Keys from the Golden Vault that just came out in February. And I think that we created her as a beleaguered scholar who has discovered information about a recent archaeological find that is about to go on display at this museum. And she has learned from her academic tomes that deal with the occult that there is some nefarious nature. There's actually something bad that happens if this artifact stays in the public for too long, but nobody believes her, and there's various reasons why nobody believes her, and it mostly comes down to the museum wants to make money, because that's what it all comes down to. But the players interact with that character. And she really conveys to them how worried she is and how scared she is and how this is something that she's, at a loss for how to be helped. And I think that was an example of a way that we created that situation to really be interesting and to give the players motivation to do the thing. It's one thing to send them somewhere and say, we'll pay you a bunch of money if you go collect this item or if you go find this person or free this prisoner. But if they have a human reason to want to do it, I think that makes the adventure a lot more compelling. Do you have any favorite motivations that you've given to characters and adventures to give the players reason to do the adventure?
I mean, continuing on that, you start an adventure with an adventure hook. This is the thing. Go and do the thing for the reason. I think what was interesting about the start of the Murkmire Malevolence is that you, through that one NPC, are given multiple hooks, multiple reasons to do this. So, because you never know what that table's going to feel, what those players, they might be motivated by greed, by violence, by revenge, whatever. So if you can give a multi-layered reason, it gives the party any number of reasons to actually latch onto. So for the Murkmire, the main one is, if you don't do the thing, bad thing is going to happen. Something drastic that will cause loss of life. But because you're talking to the NPC and they've had academic problems, they've lost their tenure, they've been discredited, so there's a human connection, which hopefully is going to motivate the party to help this person because they're struggling and they're at a loss and they are having a hard time, and you want to have that human connection. So giving them that 2 or 3 reasons, I think, helps, because there's nothing worse than presenting something to a party and they just go, we don't care.
I've had some of the most frustrating experiences, sometimes with professionals or even on streams, to try to get the party to go and do the thing. And sometimes you have to be creative as a DM. But if you're writing the adventure, if you're creating the adventure, building those natural motivations in and giving the characters a reason to want to do it is part of good adventure design. One of the things we did at the Murkmire was, in addition to this professor who was this very sympathetic character who had suffered all of these things and didn't have anybody else to help her, is we gave the characters a personal tie to her. And we had the DM tell the characters and the players, figure out how your character knows the professor. Are they a family friend of hers? Are they a former student of hers? Are they a fan of her work through the museum? Are they a museum enthusiast? And there were a list of those things. So having that kind of two-pronged approach of the character is important, but also the player characters have an inborn reason to want to do a thing, I think makes a really sort of tight story, a very compelling narrative. Kelsey, I'm interested in like personal motivations that you have given through your adventures and applying that to player characters, which is a difficult thing because creating player characters is entirely open-ended by nature, right?
Yes.
So how do you approach that challenge?
Yeah, motivating is, I think, one of the hardest parts for people to get the players pulled in. And one thing that I always focus on is you really are trying to appeal to the players first. And their characters are the way you do that, but you're trying to get the players hooked. And so when I'm writing hooks and I'm trying to get the characters involved, I center those hooks around kind of 3 core strategies or 3 types. I'm always trying to appeal to the player's desire for reward, get their characters more stuff. That's a kind of classic one. But then also like appealing to their sense of heroism. So like if their characters have a personal connection, or you can create one, or fabricate one for the adventure itself, that's going to appeal to their sense of wanting to fix and repair problems and be heroic. So we have reward, heroism, and then discovery is kind of the last one. Which is that very strongly actually appeals to the players in particular because they want to know the answer to an unanswered question. Like, why is this mystery happening? Like, why did this person need my help? Why did this monster attack? So finding a way to appeal to the players via their characters under that framework is kind of my biggest strategy with that.
Yeah, it's really fun because it kind of creates that page-turner novel syndrome, right? But at the table where the player characters, the players as people sometimes even are like, well, we want to know why this is happening. We want to continue to follow these breadcrumbs. And at that point, you've completely engaged your audience in the adventure, and that's really the goal of all of us, is to have people be engaged and have a good time. I do want to remind folks that, again, we are live here at GaryCon 2023. We are going to be taking your questions whenever anybody has anything that they want to throw into the chat. So feel free to throw it into the chat whenever you want, and at the end of this panel, we will answer them for you as long as we can answer them. There are certainly some things that we can't answer, but we will do our best, we promise.
So you mentioned those 3 pillars. There's a convention I wrote called the Sunken Tower, and actually uses all 3, but staggered in the early stages of the adventure. So it starts with the classic notice board, here's a thing, here's some money, there's some undead, there's some trouble in a village. And they go, oh, there's 50, 60 gold pieces. Fantastic. So you get that material, let's do it for that. So they go off there. It's on the edge of a swamp, they interact with that. They realize that an innocent has recently lost their life due to what's been going on, some undead resurgence. So there's the heroic, we need to do something because lives are being lost of, in this case, a young man. And then as they start to investigate, they realize that they find signposts to an ancient city of 1,000, 2,000 years ago that technically doesn't exist and is mythical. And then they are investigating further. So you've got all 3 elements sort of over the first half an hour, but sort of stepped in.
That's powerful.
Yeah, especially when you can create an environment in which, in the meta-narrative, the characters are the only people who have any chance of knowing what's going on. There's no way they can go to a library and ask a scholar for some help. They can't gather information about the town. They're not going to have any knowledge from their background that would really plug into this. There's really a completely new and fresh thing, and I think that that is such a compelling bit of game design. And sometimes it can cause people to go off track. It can cause player characters to become interested in something that maybe wasn't necessarily intended by the writer or the DM, especially if it's both. So this next little bit of the panel is going to be about how to avoid, when possible, player distraction or player character distraction. It's kind of one and the same when you're writing an adventure, and how to give advice in the text or give advice for people at the table for how to get them on track. So feel free to tell all of your stories and vent everywhere. This is an entirely open venue for that because I know all of us have had characters go completely off the rails. But Kelsey, do you have a good example or thought as to what are some pitfalls that are easily distractible, some things that really, unknowing to the writer, the DM can throw up to players that say, we're gonna go over there. Oh, squirrel. What are your squirrels?
There's so many squirrels. I think a lot of the times, I mean, I think we've all had this where players have just fixated on an NPC that you did not plan to be important in any way. Like the halfling bartender is now my best friend and I want to follow them around and learn their life. And there are all kinds of distractions of that nature. And one of the ways that I really do try to avoid it in my writing is to not give the players all the time in the world. Like to give them some kind of at least, palpable time constraint so that they, know, they can perceive maybe that we're getting off track from what we have to do because that's going to be over soon. So, then they don't get to follow the NPC home and learn all about their life that day.
Yeah, so
Another day.
a ticking clock, that's a really good strategy. It's particularly good in the heist adventures that we just wrote. Many of them have a ticking clock in which something has to be gotten, retrieved, or stopped by a certain time or a bad thing will happen. Alexander, do you have any examples of ways to keep the players focused on the prize?
I think one of the things is that it's running the I don't want to put them on rails and giving them freedom, but at the same time keeping the boundaries there. You don't necessarily want to step on the way that players are going to approach this, but I think you need to make the objectives very, very clear. They need to know absolutely what the next thing they need to do it. How are they going to do it? That's where you give them the breadth of options, but what the end or the next end goal is very, very clear. So as long as they've got that something to focus on, they're more likely to hopefully at least stay within the area that you've sort of outlined within the adventure.
Yeah, absolutely. So building off of that a little bit, one of my favorite lines in adventure design goes back to first edition Pathfinder Society adventures, which included this line all over the place because it was organized play and table variation was discouraged and there was a very tight story that was meant to be followed and there was an outcome that was meant to be recorded because it's organized play. The sentence was, this is outside the scope of this adventure. And so these adventures, of course, they take place in this wide open campaign setting. Many of them take place in very large cities or in wilderness areas in which there are many squirrels that are placed there by default because that's the way world building works. Interesting things are around every corner. But I think one of the keys when you're designing adventures is to acknowledge that they're there, especially if the readers and the players are very used to the setting. They're going to know that there's a really interesting scribe who lives over here or a very interesting famous museum that's over here. Mentioning that it's there and sort of using it as set dressing. But if there's anything that is sort of a little diamond in the rough that would jump out to a player as like, oh, there's a mysterious skeleton that's buried over in the ditch, and really the skeleton is just there because there's treasure on him, and the DM is wanting to give treasure, and you're wanting to give treasure as the writer, but there's clues that they uncover, and they're thinking that they're following a trail, and there's really nothing there. Writing, like Alexander said, putting very upfront, this is outside the scope of this adventure, really just is that signpost to the players and to the DM to know, like, do not encourage the players to continue to go any farther.
Yeah. I think it is okay to break the fourth wall a little bit and be like, hey, you guys, this is a little bit off track. It's okay to do that. I don't think you're making a mistake when you're running a game to kind of set those boundaries up on the outside a little bit. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and just being very clear, right? Like, not pulling any punches with the DM and indicating that there might be something that you have to make up whole cloth. Like, the adventure is what is written, and you don't have to feel obligated to create a whole new side adventure about the skeleton found in the ditch or about the famous sage who has lived here. He's an elf and he's lived there for 100 years or something like that.
Within computer games, you can have like long view vision computer games, but then sometimes you'll hit invisible walls and you can't progress any further, and you can put those, as you said, like with the players, be like, there's an invisible wall here. You can see the palace over there. we're not going to the palace. And then to like bring them back in.
Yeah, and honestly, you can use it almost like writing feedback, almost like audience feedback. If you're the author, or if you're writing the convention special, to note in the back of your head that, hey, the players are really interested in this thing, and I didn't think it mattered. It was a throwaway phrase that I put because I thought it sounded cool. And you can file that in the back of your memory, and maybe you write an adventure about that later. Maybe you put it into a setting or something later like that. I feel like you probably have a lot of experience in sort of building out those seeds.
Yes, definitely. I think that I kind of have been a writer that works in a game world that I've grown over the years for exactly that reason. It's like when you're playtesting something and you see the direction that your player's interest goes, that gives you something more to work with and to expand on. So I think that, that the power of playtesting is it gives you more ideas for other stuff as well. It's kind of the fun byproduct of it. So yeah.
It's that classic DM strategy of let your players do your work for you.
Oh yeah.
And they might come up with an idea that is so much better than what you had planned for the
Always.
adventure. But when they ask like, oh, is this because so-and-so is the murderer? And like so-and-so is just a rando in the bar who is sitting there. But if it's interesting and it's more interesting than what you had planned, then so-and-so can actually be the murderer. Now we're kind of getting into the differences between adventure design and DMing, but it's, I think, relevant for writers as well.
Yeah.
So really pay attention to what players are doing and what they're picking up on, because it's a clue. Do please feel free to throw any questions in the chat. Like I said, otherwise we are just going to keep talking about this stuff, and I feel like we could talk about this topic all day.
A lot, yeah.
Yeah. So another aspect of adventure design that is one of my favorite approaches and things to really think and sink my teeth into are the dramatic moments that happen in adventures. Whether you're talking about a module that is 5 or 6 sessions long or longer, or you're talking about a one-shot, or you're talking about a short arc, there are signpost bookmark moments that are dramatic and memorable and that help keep the pacing in an enjoyable sort of form, that keep the adventure from dragging along. And I personally feel like those dramatic moments can take the form of many things. They can take the form of combat. They can take the form of a set-piece encounter that then plot information is revealed. They can take place in the form of something happening on screen that is a cinematic narration that is important for the players to know about. And I want to ask my panelists here, what are some of their favorite types of dramatic moments, and maybe what are some specific ones that they've built in? Feel free, Kelsey.
Yeah, I mean, combats are always a classic. It's very gratifying to have kind of a boss fight, set-piece combat. But some of my favorite ones have actually been negotiations, like creating a complex negotiation and then having the characters come into it knowing it's that and seeing how it plays out, like, and solving the problem entirely without combat. And maybe even making some big political outcomes due to that. I've had adventures that had that as a result, and it's actually very gratifying for the players.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What do you think about dramatic moments? What are your favorite things to do as a writer?
I really like to have, when you talk about cinematics, but I like the cinematics running right up against combat. So so the scene has been set. It's the final encounter. Everything's been set up. This is what we've all been building towards, and we run the encounter. And at various trigger points, that's when you stop rolling dice. There is a narration of this cinematic moment that will change the feeling of the combat and also like the motivations of the characters. And then you jump back into the action. And then potentially rounds out with another cinematic at the end. So you can actually, rather than just have one long combat, you can split it up and shift the focus of it and the purpose of it within a large set piece.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that reminded me of one of the coolest encounters I've ever seen, and I wish I could remember who did this, but it was during a live stream that I think that was for the a D&D release, like for Tomb of Annihilation.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, it was one of the live stream events from there, and I wish I remembered who did it, but the DM was running an encounter where they were slicing in flashback scenes. Yeah. And then what happened in that scene would actually have an impact on the present. And even if it went really bad in the flashback scene, it wasn't like it was going to end the encounter when they jumped back to the present. And I thought that was just absolutely brilliant and such a beautiful harmony of story and combat put together. And so I would love to write something like that someday on my list.
That's awesome. I love it that as players we get some of our best ideas as writers, right? We experience something in the moment and we're like, that was the coolest thing. Let me try to replicate that type of feeling and experience in this adventure design. And sometimes I feel like, you know, it's hit or miss, but it can be really difficult to kind of capture that sort of feeling as a player. I'm curious, what do you guys do to try to capture your favorite player moments? Like, what are things that you draw from your experience that you want your other players, people who read your adventures, to experience?
I GM a lot, and I'm sort of a professional GM, and I go to all these different events. And one of the things that I love the most is when the other players at the table cry. If I can get them to tear up, then I won. But when you're writing those moments, it's incredibly difficult because you're presenting it in a fairly straightforward way because it has to be clear, the GM has to understand the concept. But trying to get the emotion of the scene across in what is fairly clear black and white text and hope that that gets then disseminated into another game. I mean, I kind of sometimes want to put little editor's boxes. If I was running this, I would. For everything. And so, like, little commentary. But yeah, so I think presenting sad scenes is very, very difficult. And that's one of the things I really actually quite struggle with and hope that comes across for GMs. I don't know.
Yeah, that made me think of something I've been kind of trying to incorporate into my design, which is learning a little bit from Disney, which is they open a lot of their movies with a sad scene, almost all of them. And that's a way to pull the audience in and create some sense of, you know, what we need to do here to rectify this sadness. And I think it gets people deeply invested.
Yeah.
So, but I personally find, and I don't know if you two share this, that it's actually very challenging to write sad scenes because you almost feel the emotion too much too, and you don't want to inflict it on the player. I've actually run into that. Yeah.
Oh no, I want to inflict this.
You want to inflict.
I want them sobbing.
Exactly. And if you can get there, then you're like, I am just doing fine. I am doing a good job writing. So I've been trying to pull from like the Disney effect a little bit with that, and using narration, especially because I think you have a little bit of maybe leeway early on into the adventure for a little bit more narration. Like there's the expectation that there will be a bit more than when you jump into the adventure. So you have that moment to do that. So.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I'm thinking of a specific example of this, but one of the things I've done for a long time in my writing career to try to create those really dramatic, emotional, motivating, core types of experiences that you guys described is that I would call it the human element, but it's D&D and tabletop. So sometimes it's the kobold element, or sometimes it's the halfling element, or whatever it is. But it is that sort of raw, emotional, experiential, standpoint, right? That is something that is built up over time. It's not something that you can just immediately pull out and expect the players to care about. If you try to have a dramatic moment without setting it up in any way, then it's going to completely fall flat, it's going to feel fake, it's not going to engage the players, and you're going to fail as the writer and as the DM. But if you build up a relationship between two NPCs, for example, over time, he knows exactly what I'm talking about, and you use them as quest givers, and this is, you know, the context of the players, and they are personal friends, and, you know, they are the people that the characters have trusted throughout, you know, several sessions in some cases, and then you have something that happens to them, something that puts them in danger, something that really showcases the way that these two individuals might feel about something and the way that they've been personally hurt by something, then the characters really respond to that, I think. Do you want to tell the crude story?
So Amanda and I were on one of these role-playing cruises, and we were brought on as special guests to run a game for one table, and you'd run it over the entire cruise. So the same group of people, session after session after session. So you've got I think it's like six session arc for these table. We decided to make it more difficult for ourselves, and we co-wrote an adventure with a single narrative for both of our tables. So it would effectively be the A team and the B team. And at the end of each session, they would be brought together with the two quest givers, and we would do a full debrief. So they could share the information that each party had learned and try and find out what was going on for the main meta-narrative. You mentioned Disney moments.
That's what made me think of this.
So Amanda's party had a lovely time. They went, they did NPC interaction, they made friends, they had like allies tag along, and they had a lovely Disney skip through the flowers, wonderful time. My table, not so much. It was a constant peril, threat, anxiety, body horror. I mean, real, like, pushing the envelope, so like they were struggling. And after the first session, they did the debrief, and they were like, oh man, that was terrible. And then the other party would say, and they're like, okay, well, it can't be as bad tomorrow. And then the next session, they did the thing, and they came back together, and it was exactly the same. Disney with cute little talky animals, and Hellraiser. So those were the two notes. And this carried on and on. But the two quest givers deepened the interaction, deepened the relationship with the players, until the climactic adventure where we brought all the players together. We wrote this so all 12 players were running at one table for an enormous mass combat with everybody going on. With the cinematics, we had the players doing a combat, and we had the NPCs fighting, a second combat that was, in character terms, like 12 levels above the party, so they could see the epic level fights going on and appreciate it in character, but not get bogged down with the complexity and the adventure and everything. Until bad things happened to the NPCs and one had to sacrifice themselves for the other. But then it turned out he spent life force to bring the other person back, and we had people at the table sobbing.
Oh my gosh.
And I was sitting there, and in my little shriveled heart, I was like,
You were just a little sobby.
oh no, well that's the thing, this is coming on to DMing, when I write sadness in adventures, because I'm writing mostly con stuff, I know I'm going to be running it.
Yes.
So when I'm role-playing the NPCs, I'm upset, and I'm crying as I'm talking to them about the situation thing, which sets everybody else off. So I know I'm going to be crying.
Yes.
That's how I've written it.
You plan to cry. That's
Yes,
good.
yeah.
Yes.
This is a deep psychological dive into how to make people not be okay.
I know. That's our whole goal, is to make them not okay right up until they're okay again. Like,
Yeah.
But that was a cinematic moment, right? And we've got a question here in chat that I think is a really good question I wanted to get to. And we were talking about dramatic moments before. So the question from Savage Stalker is, what kind of mechanics lend well to allowing cinematic moments to flourish? And this is a really interesting, broad level question. Do you have any initial thoughts, Kelsey?
I do, and I kind of want to credit this to my friend Brandish, who writes for Runehammer Games. I always use a lot of frameworks when I write. I'm sure we all do. And one way to kind of add drama on the encounter level, it's actually sometimes similar at the adventure level, which is you maybe want a little bit of time pressure.
Yes.
And so that sometimes is referred to as a timer. And another thing is a treat, like a thing that might be worth pursuing in the encounter that you have to go out of your way to get, like a helpful item or something that could heal you or your friends, or something that you need to rescue and take out of the encounter. And then obviously there's the threat. That's the time retreating threat method. So you're adding pressure with the threat, whether it's a combat or a hazard or something like that. And when you mix those three things together, it tends to create the right kind of pressure and momentum to make something exciting.
I'm going to talk about a particular type of cinematic moment. So it's the chase. So let's talk about Dungeons & Dragons or any sort of similar type of system. So you have a character, it can move 30 foot. So you have an enormous map and somebody's running away and you go, I move 30 foot, and then I move 30 foot again. And we just keep doing that. You're not going to run that at the table. You're not going to have that mechanics there because that's not interesting. And your table isn't big enough to actually run a chase through a city street. So having that blocked out into cinematic moments and actually use a specific chase mechanic where you break down the chase into maybe 6, 7, 8 obstacles. You've got to zigzag past the person delivering the chickens in the boxes. You've got to slide under the wagon cart. You've got to do all these things that we would see in a classic chase. then formulating mechanical skill checks that those players will have to do for that, and you can then describe the cinematics of what's going on, still have them make rolls, so we're still involved with the game, we're still making the checks, but we're not bogging down to 5-foot square movement.
Right. And then you're kind of turning it into like a success versus failures overall, you know, and it's I kind of like that because it's definitely like the players are achieving or not achieving like very concretely right before their eyes. And
Yes.
I really think that's a super elegant way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that idea of filling out the bones of what is a very simple mechanic in many senses. Sometimes it's as simple as, did they succeed at a skill check or not? How many skill checks did they succeed at? But the difference between just being a boring roll your d20 and add your modifier and going around the table and creating that filled out moment that you were mentioning is really that set dressing, right? It's that explaining that you slide under the cart. You don't just make a sleight of hand check. You don't just make an acrobatics check. You are sliding under that cart and you're artfully dodging the fruits that are flying behind you. And you know, you really give that sense of being in an action movie or doing something really dramatic. But really, it's just a single die roll.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
And you're still giving the players maybe a chance to decide how much risk they want to take in the moment. Like, do I want to jump over it or do I want to slide under it? And, you know, maybe you'll get a slightly better result by choosing the harder version. But,
Yes.
you know,
Yeah.
and so you're still creating those options and the cinematic element to it. And I think that, yeah, that introduces some choice while still keeping it simple. So,
The one of the difficulties with a binary system is you roll, did you succeed? No. And then you stop. Did you successfully unlock the door? No, the door's still locked, you're not going through. Potentially looking at some sort of fail forward mechanic in that system keeps the action going, doesn't bog it down. So let's say sliding under the cart. They go to slide under the cart, they fail, they still make the distance, but maybe now they have ground the side of their leg down, they're bleeding, so they've taken damage. They've still got past that obstacle, but now they're worse off. It keeps the tension, it keeps the pace going, but adds an additional level of tension, which is, oh, we could come off pretty badly, even if we get to the end and do the objective.
Yeah, and it's keeping in your head as the writer and the anticipation of what will happen at the table and what will the DM need to know, what are ideas that the DM will need for how to describe what is happening with this chase. And once you have that in your head as the writer, you can then build that scaffold out, like what you were saying, that framework out. Once you know that the chase needs to take place in these specific places in the city and there are these obstacles, then you can write out what are the ways that the players could overcome these challenges. Speaking of set dressing and describing what it is that players do, there's a very interesting comment slash question in chat from Firestorm703934. Hello, Firestorm. Who wants to know if we've ever heard of the idea of having players keep blank sheets and for them to slowly discover who they are and presumably what they can do, and having the DM have all of the stats of their race and all of their abilities, and say for example you rolled a 13 but you have a +2 on that. So you as the DM are conveying the character sheet information.
Right, so who's that? Firestorm703. Have you been reading my adventure notes? Because I've actually got an entire game planned out where the plan is that it's actually a pre-written adventure, but I'm doing this. All the players sit down at the table, and you give full character descriptions of what these characters are. We'll come back to them in a minute. And the players then decide from the character descriptions and how they look and how they sound, what they're going to play. Now, they have been deliberately described to go against type.
oh, yes.
Because I don't want the players to know, oh, this is clearly a wizard. I'm going to play the clearly a wizard. So they're sitting down, and then as the adventure goes, exactly what you were saying, everybody rolls a dice. I go, right, can anybody remember about that ancient battle? Everybody rolls a dice, they give you the number, you've got your little sheet, and you check round. Because what you want is, you want that confusion amongst the players. Because if you say you've got a 10 and you've got an 8, and I give you the information but not you, it's like, hang on, but I got a higher number. And you're like, yes. You rolled a higher number. Yes, you did. So then the players are writing, do I know about history on there? Am I good with swords? I don't know. It's cool from an adventure perspective. It's a lot more work. So if I was writing a 32-page adventure, the instructions for that are going to take up a few pages because it's actually quite a complex thing. But also, this is where session zeros really come in because you need the buy-in from the players. Because what happens if we're 3 sessions in and you realise that you're not playing the kind of class you wanted to play?
Right.
You've got to make sure that everybody's okay with that. So I like that as a framework. I like that as but it's
It's a lot of work.
it is a lot of work, and you've got to have the right players who are going to buy in. I certainly wouldn't run that at a convention because you don't have the time.
Yeah, but it still comes back to the idea, and like I actually had never even considered writing or playing something in that manner. So it's really interesting to think about, and it does kind of come back to the whole like playing to find out what happens. Mm-hmm. Well, maybe there are other elements of the gameplay experience that we can do the whole find out what's going to happen with this, like with character build. Or, I mean, I'm trying to think of other examples. Like a lot of times we'll be exploring like a location that the players are learning more about as they go. They're playing to find out. But what are other applications for that idea? I'm gonna wake up in the middle of the night with a bunch of ideas for this now. None are coming to mind right this minute, but yeah, I love the notion of that. Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of work, and there's a lot of investment. There's a lot of buy-in required, but it's a very interesting idea. And in chat, there's a mention that this is something that happened in the '80s a lot. This is a very kind of classic D&D idea. There are a couple of old adventures that do this that spring to mind. But an interesting way of approaching it is to sort of think of it narratively. Think of it like the characters have lost their memory, so they might have a character sheet, but they might have a couple of their values erased because they don't remember what they know about history. Maybe they don't remember their name. Maybe they don't have their equipment and they don't remember what it is that they can use. So having those kind of montage moments or those epiphany moments, when there's a skill check called for, that can be an interesting modern approach to that idea of the players don't know what's happening.
If you haven't seen it, there was a Canadian sci-fi series on the Sci-Fi Channel. I think it's called Dark Matter. Everybody wakes up on their ship in like cryo sleep. Nobody has any memories. And there's a group of people on a spaceship going, who are you? And you as the viewer are watching these people learn about themselves, who they were, what they can do. It's great. You should check it out.
I love that. I'm going to do it.
So I think that we have covered a lot of the big bullet points for adventure design. We have talked about dramatic moments. We have talked about mechanics for resolving those dramatic moments. We have talked about derailments. We have talked about character development and player investment. We've covered a lot of different things. We are about at time, so I am going to have us reintroduce ourselves and tell folks where they can find you. And once again, we are live here at GaryCon 2023. We've enjoyed our time with you. We hope you've enjoyed your time with us. I have been Amanda Hammond, the moderator of your adventure design panel. I am senior designer at Wizards of the Coast on D&D, and you can find me on Twitter at Amanda Hammond.
I'm Kelsey Dion, founder of the Arcane Library. I write adventures and most recently Shadow Dark RPG, which is still on Kickstarter for a few more days. So it's been a fun one.
Exciting.
I have been and continue to be T. Alexander Stangroom, COO of Cobble Press and game writer and designer. You can find me on Twitter, TA_Stangroom.
All right, and so for all of us here at GaryCon, thank you very much for watching and have wonderful gaming experiences.
Thanks very much.